Hey Retro Gamers. Today on Smashing Bricks, we rescue all the cute little bunnies and animals from the evil Dr. Robotnik in Sonic the Hedgehog for the SEGA Genesis. Hey, welcome back to Smashing Bricks, a retro gaming podcast. This is episode 25. My name is Eddie Inzauto, and today I'm joined by a podcasting legend, a founding father of the Cane and Rinse podcast, Mr. Leon Cox. Hey, Leon, how are you?
Hello. I'm all right, thank you. Thanks for having me on. You gave me a lot of E's in the show notes and a lot of O's in the reading.
Yeah. All right. So you are from the Cane and Rinse podcast. Now that is a 13 years running show. Yeah. I've already had a guest from the Cane and Rinse podcast on. Yes. I had James Carter on the show. So how's it going for you over there?
Yeah, it just keeps going. We can't stop. So because like a bit like yourself, we cover a game or series of games per podcast. We've done 600 odd shows over 12 years. We're in our 13th year, I think, in 2024, and we have a very wide remit in terms of the kind of games we cover. We cover new stuff, ancient stuff, and everything in between. Any genre, any format that we can play on. And so because they keep releasing more and more games, our list keeps getting longer and longer. And so even if after the end of a year I think, we've done quite a lot of these, I look at the big list of several thousand titles that we've got that we'd still like to talk about, and I think, well, we better carry on. So so we do. Yeah. I saw an article today with somebody from a publisher saying there are too many video games, and I'm inclined to agree in terms of how long I've got left to live and how many games I still want to play and how many games I'd like to talk about. The kind of the USP of our podcast was always that you have to actually beat the game that you talk about. Mm-hmm. So covering 50 games a year, I host like 30 or 35 of those shows. So that means that I definitely kind of have to finish that many games a year, so there's a sort of element of discipline about it as well.
Yeah, that's quite a few. So that's awesome. Love Cane and Rinse.
Thank you.
But the listeners don't exactly know you unless they have listened to Cane and Rinse. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about your gaming habits and history, so they have a good idea of where you're coming from with your opinions and positions on games. So you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So first off, when did you start playing video games?
My earliest memories are definitely being sat on bar stools as a sort of 7-year-old, 6 or 7, in pubs, being put up against the Space Invaders and Asteroids machines of the time.
The good old days.
Yeah, totally. But then in the UK in the early 80s, people particularly had ZX Spectrum computers or Commodore 64 computers, and some had Amstrads, and that was the kind of the way in, going around friends' houses and seeing these incredibly cool and exciting games that sparked my imagination. And then I got on board the train with my own computer in about 1985. I got an Atari 800 XL, which was actually much bigger in America than it was in the UK, but I loved it nonetheless, and it did me for the next few years. And then ever since then I've been making the format and generation jump whenever it came up. So cool. How many years? I don't know how many. 40 something years anyway. Yeah.
Amazing. You are a pre-crash gamer.
Yeah.
Which is unusual.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so over all those years, have you settled on a favorite game genre?
I'm going to sound very sitting on the fancy with a lot of these answers, but no, I like a lot of stuff, too much stuff. I'll play almost any genre, and probably to a fault. I think that there's probably some genres that I've persisted with that I've never been a huge fan of, but just because I always want to like feel the fun that other people are getting from it. So, but yeah, I like classic arcade action. I like, high score games and single screen platformers and old school shmups and things like that. But yeah, I'm just as happy sitting down with the latest AAA open world RPG bonanza.
Very cool. An omni gamer.
Yeah.
A true omni gamer.
Pretty much.
Okay. Well, how about this? Do you have a favorite console generation?
It was very exciting in the mid to late 90s. I think actually a lot of those games from that era have actually aged the worst. The 3D games in particular, polygon games from the N64 and the PS1 look pretty wobbly and shaky now. But yeah, I don't think I've ever been more kind of excited about video games than I was right then. But having said that, I think the 360 was an amazing time. The PS4 was an amazing time. So, yeah, I know I'm always hedging my bets with these answers.
Yeah, I see. We're seeing a trend here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like everything. I agree with you, though, about that time. I always think that was the most exciting time for me. Okay, but just before that, and related to the game that we're going to be talking about today, there was the Super Nintendo, or SNES, versus the SEGA Genesis, or Mega Drive. So between those two, which side were you on?
It comes down to the libraries. It's always down to the games, not the hardware itself. And I think in terms of long-term play, it would probably be the Super Nintendo, just because I think the first-party games on there were that much more kind of epic than a lot of the Sega stuff, which was very brief. But actually, that was to its credit in terms of like Sonic that we're going to talk about. Pros and cons, but yes, I suppose if I only had access to one of those libraries forever, it would be the Super Nintendo's library.
Okay.
You forced me into a choice.
I forced you. Okay. This one you're most certainly not going to have a definitive answer for, or prove me wrong. Do you have a favorite game of all time?
No, but if I'm forced at gunpoint into a corner, a few titles do spring to mind. So Galaga is a game that I can still play for hours and hours. Always makes me happy. Bubble Bobble, Tato's 1986, Coin Op, and I should say Rainbow Islands, the story of Bubble Bobble 2.
Woo.
Yeah. So let's say that, Rainbow Islands.
Okay. All right. So that's Leon, everybody. An omni gamer, an all-time gamer, and probably the most objective voice you will ever hear on video games. So that's what you can take away listening to this podcast. So I think it's time to get into our game, Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes. Yeah, so it is. And I think one of the reasons that I think it's fun to talk about Sonic, even though it sounds like a very, obvious kind of pick for a show like this, is that I think like the gaming world has probably because Sega has lost sight of what Sonic the Hedgehog was, which to me was a fairly surreal, fanciful character platformer for a 16-bit console in the very early 90s. Long before, although I think he was sort of designed to have a certain amount of Western appeal and attitude, the way that manifested in the original Sonic was in this very kind of charming, cute, delightful, colourful way. I should say I was, as people will have maybe worked out, I was actually arguably a bit old for Sonic the Hedgehog when he arrived. So I guess I was 18, 19 when Sonic came out, whereas my little cousins were more of the sort of 8 to 12 age group that I think were probably where Sonic was weaponized towards them with the comics and all that sort of thing. They were the sort of kids that could name every single badnik in the game. Whereas me, it was just like, here's another cool 16-bit game that I want to play. Yeah, and I think it was my even older friend actually, Jim, who's now in his 60s, who showed me Sonic the Hedgehog for the first time. Obviously, I'd seen it in magazines, but I remember him. He had the Genesis that I would end up buying off him, and he rented Sonic the Hedgehog, as people did back then, from Blockbuster, and I remember the loop aspect in Green Hill Zone Stage 1. It's hard to imagine now, but things like that just weren't really possible on previous generations of machines. Platforms were flat and backgrounds were flat. They were not. There weren't slopes, and there certainly weren't loop-the-loops. So it was the size of the character, the boldness of the visuals, the kind of the catchiness of the music. All that stuff actually was more impressive to me than the much vaunted speed of the character, which was an aspect and a facet, but it was actually the feel of just negotiating this bizarre fantasy land and jumping on these enemies and popping them so satisfyingly that kind of propelled me through.
Yeah. It is so interesting that curvature that they added was like so unusual. Kind of striking. But it's funny you mentioned that as like your first thing, because when I was doing some of my research, that was an issue for them. The programmer, Yuji Naka, he had trouble getting Sonic to actually do the loop instead of just like clipping through it or something. So they did a lot of reworking of that particular Green Hill Zone before kind of settling in on how to build this game.
Yeah, I think from what I understand from reading about the development and watching videos and stuff, it wasn't easy. They had a relatively short development time, and they had a lot of Sega pinned a lot of hope and expectation on it because they didn't really have a character for their machine that was as kind of instantly recognizable and commercially viable as Nintendo did. So yeah, it was a big deal, and yeah, the game came out and the reviews were broadly incredibly positive.
Yeah, so you mentioned your little cousins. I probably would have been maybe around the age of your little cousins. This was absolutely my first 16-bit game. Right. Now that I have started playing this for the podcast and thinking about, where did I play Sonic the Hedgehog? And as I started to play it, I realized, oh yeah, it's all coming back to me now. My friend Jacqueline had this Sega Genesis very early. I still only had a Nintendo. Sonic the Hedgehog was the first 16-bit game I think I ever laid eyes on. And we played it a lot. And it was difficult, even though it's not supposed to be difficult, and I don't feel like it's difficult now, but I didn't see all the way through to the end of it.
It gets a bit challenging towards the end. There are some particular quirks and sort of design facets that I think they would smooth out a bit in the sequels, albeit different teams were involved. But yeah, it has its moments for sure, and certainly for kids. But having played the 8-bit version, which was developed separately by Ancient, I would say overall it's considerably tougher with a very different
I guess that
feel.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Probably just harder to program it as responsively as a 16-bit title with the power of the Genesis versus the Master System. I actually played a Game Gear Sonic game back in the day. Yeah. I remember playing it. I just don't remember which one it was. I don't know if it was 1, 2, or Chaos.
It was pretty amazing to see Sonic running on a little handheld back then, even with obviously the incredible battery limitations, and knowing that it was essentially the 8-bit game rather than the 16-bit game. It was still impressive. A friend of mine had a Game Gear, and he was like, look, Sonic the Hedgehog on a handheld. And
the Game Gear itself was freaking amazing after, only having played the Game Boy. I was like, wow, Game Gear, so good, so pretty.
You just had to play it near a plug socket.
Yeah. Like, it was going to lose its battery life in an hour, less. I don't know. It felt like instantly.
Terrible. Yeah, it was an expensive business unless you had a lot of rechargeables.
Yeah. I also had the Tiger Electronics LCD handheld Sonic something or other game. I remember it. It was
Mm-hmm.
white with yellow
I
buttons.
think it was just
and
called
like
Sonic
blue.
the Hedgehog. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they made
Loosely
ones for
based.
the 2 and 3, whatever. But I think I had the first one.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I never played one, but I've seen them. I've seen them around.
Yeah, I mean, those LCD games, they're just bad. So you have looked into the history of Sonic.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of been with with me and around me. But yes, I think we started our Sonic series of podcasts. We're just doing them sporadically a few years back, so that was probably the last time I spent any time kind of really looking at it. But it's never far. You're never far away from a YouTube video about Sonic the Hedgehog or a magazine article.
Yeah. Plus, you were already more aware of things that were going on at that time versus, a 7-year-old would have been.
I was buying all the magazines. I used to buy an insane amount of computer game, video game magazines, and so Sonic was absolutely everywhere on covers, and there were always stories about it. There was the rumor that it was US Gold were going to license it and bring it to the home computer systems, and then of course there were the myriad substandard ports, clones, I should say, Yazuls and things like that, where computer game makers were trying to cash in on the kind of the character action platformer buzz. And we were steeped in it really. And I remained a Sonic fan for a good few years. It really I liked the whole series on the 16-bit systems. So it was only once it started going 3D that it started leaving me behind. So yeah, right. I was well into my 20s while still being a Sonic fan, albeit one who couldn't, as I say, I couldn't list off the name of every enemy because I wasn't 8 years old.
Yeah. So I mean, this game, it came out in 91, June in North America, July on the Mega Drive in your home region and Japan. And apparently there was an arcade version in 91, which I had no idea about.
Yeah, it was I can't remember what it's called. It's like arcade. It was a Mega Drive arcade machine, basically a Mega Select or something, and it was on a timer, so you couldn't get anywhere. You would run out of time, and then that makes game sense. Over. So it doesn't really count.
Yeah, on a timer. It reminds me of that show Nick Arcade, where they used to play arcade cabinets as a competition on a game show.
Yeah. We had some
and they were all on
like
timers.
That. Yeah.
Developed by Sonic Team, who was named after this game because that's where they came together. Published by Sega. Programmer Yuji Naka, who had previously worked on Phantasy Star on the Master System and a Genesis port of Ghouls and Ghosts to get him a little notoriety within the company. And
now he has a very different kind of notoriety. Currently serving a prison sentence for insider trading, or if possible his sentence got transferred into a financial one. But yes, he was sentenced to imprisonment last year.
Oh my God, I had no idea.
Corporate insider trading, yeah. So yes, notorious and somewhat disgraced now, which is a shame because he was making interesting games right up until the 2000s. Anyway, interesting guy, but yes, sadly got involved in financial wrongdoings.
Yeah. I think Yuji Naka is widely known as the father of Sonic, even though artist Naoto Oshima actually created Sonic in a way and came up with the idea of the curvature in the levels.
Right.
And designer Hirokazu Yasuhara, who joined third in this team, he was the third entry to the team, which would ultimately be about 7. He became the lead on the project because he had more experience. But Naka, generally, history has remembered him as the father of Sonic because he basically built the game, I guess. Yeah. Composer on the game was Masato Nakamura, who was not part of Sega. He was the bassist of a J-pop band called Dreams Come True at the time. I had no idea about that. That's crazy.
So I think it was kind of obviously there had been some other games by this point that had used I think in some ways incorporated the music of real quotes artists, non-video game artists, but here the idea was, right, we've got this fantastic sound chip, the Yamaha YM whatever it's called on the Mega Drive, so let's actually get somebody who really is like a proper, polished pop composer. These were proper melodies, proper, bops that you could get thoroughly hooked on, and would actually kind of drive you through the game.
Yeah, that soundtrack definitely hit when I started up. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this feeling. And the music brings it back.
If this was the first 16-bit game you played, it must have been fairly mind-blowing to go from the kind of the burbles of the Master System to the, so you got proper instruments, almost. Certainly, what sound like drums and bass and keyboards on the Sonic the Hedgehog soundtrack. It would have been so. I mean, it was striking to me, even though I'd come off, the Amiga, which used sampled sounds and stuff. But this was, and there was already plenty good music on the Genesis at this point. We'd already had Revenge of Shinobi and stuff like that. But yeah, this was so bright and shiny and happy, and yeah,
definitely. But why does Sonic exist? Obviously, to defeat Mario. Right? Which was the project's initial code name, Defeat Mario. Sega wanted a mascot because they saw the success of Super Mario. And they wanted someone as iconic as Mickey Mouse, if that was possible. That's what Sega's president said, when they were starting to come up with this a few years before release. Actual development began in 1990. And with Naka on the team of two, he wanted something fast, right? Because he was a fan of Mario. He had done Ghouls and Ghosts, and he thought both were slow. So they were trying to come up with this mascot. He wanted speed for the game, and they needed to figure out how to do that. So they focused on fast animals. They had come up with some other things, like a rabbit who could grab objects with its ears and throw it, but it didn't really work out because it messed with the pacing and kind of the engine couldn't support it. It was too complex for the programming. And they also wanted single button gameplay, which was funny because, well, I'll get to it later. Something about that one button gameplay. So they wanted a little bit more simple, and they came up with this idea of rolling into a ball. And they focused on animals who could roll into a ball. They looked at armadillos, and they settled on this hedgehog who was designed by Oshima. And I read that it was based on Felix the Cat's head and Mickey Mouse's body. And while I don't see Mickey Mouse's body, if you put Sonic next to Felix the Cat, it's incredible how it's like, oh yeah, that's Felix with a hedgehog hat on.
Yeah, I've thought of the Mickey Mouse thing with the gloves, but I don't think I'd quite made that connection. It is a funny, it does make sense when you go through it, but actually the fact that it was a hedgehog to me was one of the appeals, because hedgehogs are not a particularly fast animal at all. So it does make sense when you think about the curling up into a ball thing. But actually, part of the appeal to me was that this was a cute blue hedgehog. I don't even know, I don't know how common hedgehogs are all around the world. They're pretty common here in the UK. I mean, you mainly see them flattened on the road.
Oh, no.
Is it the same in North America? Do you have
I
hedgehogs?
don't know that we have indigenous hedgehogs,
right.
To be honest.
There you go.
They were actually concerned that Americans wouldn't know what a hedgehog is.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
I don't know if that's because Americans are dumb or because of the range of the animal. So we can just assume it's because of the range of the animal for our pride, for my pride.
But yeah, they're generally known, over in the UK, I don't know about elsewhere, but they are known as timid but friendly garden animals. But Sonic here, with his blue spikes, it just didn't. I like the fact that it was so kind of nonsensical. It was surreal. It wasn't the obvious choice.
Yeah. It's funny, you mentioned their personality, right? And how Sonic was given an attitude for, I guess, for the Genesis itself in its marketing versus the Super Nintendo, maybe to appeal to Americans. But some of the ideas that they had were awful. like putting him in a rock band, giving him vampire fangs, and giving him a human girlfriend named Madonna. All of this was scrapped. Thank goodness. So they worked real hard on this game. As I said, development began just a year before, not even. And the three of them worked, plus the additionals, worked 19 hours a day on the project for many months. There were things they couldn't do, like add a 2-player. And they had great challenges, as I said earlier, with the level design, trying to make them expansive, yet manageable, navigable, and appealing to gamers' sensibilities everywhere. So Naka actually scrapped Green Hill Zone numerous times and started over from basically zero so many times, and it took him 8 months to make Green Hill Zone, which is nuts, because that's like most of the development. Then once they had Green Hill Zone, I guess they kind of said, okay, we figured out some sort of formula or something.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to me to see that Green Hill Zone took such a large amount of time. And it's Green Hill Zone that you think of when you think of Sonic, I guess. It's first level.
Yeah, certainly. It's so important to make a strong first impression, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's interesting because some of those iconic things about Sonic in that Green Hill Zone, like the loop-de-loops and the tubes that are all curvy, they don't really feature as heavily in later levels.
No.
The later levels have their own other things.
Yeah, I have a feeling they got the order of the levels got rejigged quite a bit as well, and I think there's various assets still on the cartridge, even though it's a relatively small cartridge that were never used actually in the game. So yeah, I think it's quite common for Mega Drive games to find, because there was that debug mode that you could access on certain versions of the game, and you could actually find objects in there that you could then place on the map that were never seen outside of that.
So the game in its final form, it was revealed at the 1991 CES. They held it back, and until they could kind of steal a show, and they did. It basically was the best thing at that 91 CES, and it won the award for innovation there. It came out just a few months later. It was successful. We'll talk about that. And then they made it a pack-in, and Sonic was officially Sega's mascot, and the console wars were real because Sega could now compete.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned some of the ports already, right?
Many.
So late 91, we had that 8-bit version we talked about by Ancient on Master System and Game Gear. It later came to the Game Boy Advance as Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis in 2006. It was on iOS in 2009, Windows via Steam in 2010. In 2013, there was a 3DS version called 3D Sonic the Hedgehog, where the code was rewritten to add the stereoscopic 3D and give features like filters and a level select, and they added the spin dash from Sonic 2 back into the game, which was also available in a specific mode for the GBA title. And it was also in basically every Sega compilation. There were 10 or more that I won't list, but they throw them in there all the time. It was on downloadable services, starting with the Wii, PS3, and 360 in 2006. And it was on Android in 2014. And I think it's on some of the other downloadable services, even beyond that generation.
What I do find interesting, though, is if I pick up my Switch now, there are 3 separate ways of playing Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog, like without even thinking about it. So there is just a ridiculous amount of ways to play Sonic. It's absolutely, you can't own a machine that doesn't have Sonic on it.
I mean, yeah, with good reason, though, like, because Sonic, he's a core part of gaming history. This was
absolutely
the best-selling game in America in 1991, beating Super Mario World, which came out just 2 months later. It was Blockbuster Video's most rented game in 1991. Sold 2 million copies worldwide in 1991. And as of 2016, 24 million copies worldwide were sold. And 15 million of those were the original cartridge based
Wow.
on 2009 data.
Huh.
It's big
Yeah.
time.
You can see why Sega continue as a publisher to release a Sonic game pretty much every year without fail, because even the ones that don't review that well, I think still essentially profit, make money.
That's their boy.
Yeah.
We mentioned contemporary titles. I think the only ones that really matter are Super Mario World, and Zelda actually came out in Japan late that year.
Yeah, not a bad lineup.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually that's why I'm very specific about how Sonic did so well in the US, because in Japan, Zelda dominated that year, even though it came out at the very end of the year. And I'm not sure about Europe.
Again, we got the Super Nintendo later, so I'm not sure either. Sonic was big.
Yeah. All right, so you had mentioned that it reviewed very well.
Yeah, I remember some of these. So Ace Magazine, which was Advanced Computer Entertainment, a UK magazine, used to award scores out of 1,000.
Amazing.
And this one got 925. CMVG, Computer and Video Games, gave it 94%. EGM in America gave it 36 out of 40. Joystick gave it 98%. Ray's magazine over here gave it 95%, and Sega Power, of course, gave it 97%. Oh, and the legendary Mean Machines, also from the UK, gave it 92%, and that was indicative across the board. Game of the Year from EGM and the Golden Joystick Awards, and Best Video Game from the ECTS European Computer Trade Show. So it was
big time.
Big time, yeah, big success.
So what else? We mentioned some of these Game of the Year awards. In 2016, it was a second-year inductee into the Strong National Museum of Play's World Video Game Hall of Fame. Only 6 games made it in before it in the first year, even though it was a finalist in that first inaugural 2015 class. Super Mario Bros., Tetris, Pong, Pac-Man, Doom, and World of Warcraft, if you're wondering. And Super Mario World still hasn't even ever been a finalist. But I just thought that the Sonic lovers would like that note. Even though I'll defend Super Mario World to my grave, because that game is an all-time best, for sure. Yeah. And even retro reviews still rate the game very highly, which is, not always the case for old games.
Yeah.
So you'll still see retro reviews pulling out Sonic 1 and being like, 87%, 90, maybe not 98, 99 like when it first came out, but people still love it.
Yeah, fundamentally, I think, well, we'll get into it, but I think it wouldn't be fair to say it hasn't aged a day, but also I think it retains a lot of what was enjoyable about it.
Yeah, exactly. And that does bring us right to our retro review. Our retro replay experience. We played the game. You probably caned and rinsed it. I did not quite beat it, unfortunately. I said it was hard before, and it's way easier now, but it still kind of got me toward the end there, and I refused to do save states this time around because, I don't know, it felt wrong with Sonic. Like, it had to be pure.
Yeah. It's not too bad to do it without save states. You can rack up a load of extra lives on the early levels, basically, and then they'll see you through. It's well worth picking your way through the first few levels and racking up the extra lives and continues for later use. Because I would say the last couple of levels do get a little bit testy and a little bit frustrating at points.
Yeah, I was surprised to note that, different from my recollection, there was a lot of ability to go up and down and around and move slowly in a lot of places and do a fair amount of exploration and finding little nooks and crannies in the levels than I remember. I remember the speed and going down the tubes and over the loops and flying through the air and just zooming to the end. And it's not entirely like that, right?
this is the thing that is probably the most contentious about Sonic. And I watched a video recently. I think it was talking about the most recent Sonic release, which was Sonic Superstars, which came out before Christmas 2023. I haven't played it. It looks okay. It looks fine. It's another 2D kind of attempt following on from Generations, I suppose. Mania was a slightly different thing because it was effectively a fan project that Sega got behind. And it was John Linneman of Digital Foundry, who's a friend of our podcast as well. And he was saying, he said something that I think I'd never really thought about Sonic. So the kind of one of the most famous criticisms is the game wants me to go fast, but it doesn't let me because I keep hitting things. But he said, and because this was so obvious to me from the beginning, I'd never thought to say it to anyone else. He said he thinks people forget to tap down on the D-pad. So you're running at enemies and you're taking hits. And really the answer is just tap down on the D-pad and you become invincible.
Right.
You kill things. And it's like maybe a huge number of those people who are out there going, oh, this game's so frustrating because you get up to speed and then you take a hit, are just not pushing down on the D-pad so they don't get turned into a spiky ball. Is that possible? I think it might be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Because they added the spin dash in the very next game, which starts you out in the ball. Whereas in this game, you just start out running. You build up momentum.
Exactly.
You start slow, and then you build up momentum. And unless you go into one of those tubes that automatically puts Sonic into a ball, you have to press the down button on the D-pad in order to go into that spin. And we said it was a one-button game, but I think it's a two-button game because the D-pad, you consider that something separate, but that down button on the D-pad is an integral part of the controls, and they could have put that on the B button or C button, and it may have actually been better for playability.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. But also what you say is true, like actually outside of particularly some of the levels, obviously Spring Yard Zone is the pinball one, and I get why people that's probably my least favorite level to go back to because you have the least amount of control over Sonic,
bouncing off the plungers and the bumpers and stuff. And it has a certain enjoyment to it, but also it really does start to irritate when you're trying to just inch your way through the level and you just keep getting bounced off bumpers and whatever else, and the control is just that little bit kind of wayward. But actually there are a lot of levels which are much more traditional platforming levels. There's so many secrets hidden behind walls in this game and in interesting places, smashable bricks and little puzzle elements. I mean, it's not Mario in this regard. There aren't quite so many secrets, but they are there. It's more Donkey Kong Country-ish.
Right.
Yeah. You'll find those walls that are like suspicious in a way. I think there is a visual cue, but it's pretty subtle.
Yeah, I think some of them, I don't know if
there is no visual cue. Oh, yeah, like the ones you can go behind the foreground.
You just push against them and yes, again, to me, who's been playing this for over 30 years, I just know where to go, so it's a bit different. But there's all those clever clues that they've been putting in the Mario games for a long time to suggest that you might want to look somewhere. This doesn't really have those in most places, although there are areas where, because the other control that we haven't mentioned, and yes, it is left and right on the D-pad for the most part, and A, B, or C, which all do exactly the same thing. But yes, down on the D-pad not only makes you spin dash, but it also, if you hold up or down, you can look around the level, which always felt kind of partly, like, why am I doing this? But actually, there are some bits where you can see secrets and things like that, places to go. I mean, it'll only get you more rings and power-ups and whatever else, because there's not that much to kind of collect in this game, I suppose. Games over the 90s, they added more and more different kind of currencies within the game, more trinkets and things to collect for different rewards, whereas Sonic is rings and TVs. That's pretty much it. Like, but I still find the the sheer act of finding a row of TVs and bouncing from one to the other inherently satisfying. I don't know about you, but the actual, just the way that the physics, such as they are coded, and the sound, the combination of the popping sound and the bounce is just inherently satisfying to me. And maybe that's where I get something out of it because I was there at the time that maybe a new player wouldn't get. I don't know.
Maybe. Are those really TVs? Because I didn't realize that until just now.
I think they're supposed to be TVs or monitors or screens of some kind.
Amazing.
Did you just think they were
I thought
like
they were boxes with a clear
boxes?
front, like where you get the newspaper out of.
I mean, that makes as much sense. I think they are described as TVs in the manual, but then I don't know if they were in the original Japanese manual. I had various copies of this on the Mega Drive back in the day, and one of them was a Japanese box copy. It's worth checking out the box art if you've never seen it, because it's completely different to the American and European box art, and it's got a very sort of abstract, design heavy kind of feel, and it's got sort of slogans on it and things like this. It's quite interesting. Typically
cool.
Sort of quirky of the era.
Smash open video monitors with the supersonic spin attack to get special items that help you defeat evil Dr. Robotnik.
I mean, why? I don't know, but there you go.
Because there's the TV generation. Super rings, shields, power sneakers, one-ups, and invincibility. Wow.
Yes.
TV monitors.
I mean, the speed-up shoes arguably do feel a bit redundant, but they are quite useful at getting you up to spin dash speed more quickly.
Yeah, because you do have to build momentum, and it's rather slow to start.
It is very sluggish to start with, which is why every version of Sonic 1 post-1997 Sonic Jam, they added spin dash to the original, which was invented for Sonic 2 by the American team that put that game together. But it was like, if only they'd thought of it while they were making the original.
Well, actually, they initially made Sonic's speed equivalent, his default speed, basic speed, just by pressing left and right, equivalent to the Mario run speed. And it wasn't fully agreed upon whether this was great or too fast, or so they reduced the speed a little bit before releasing the game. He was actually intended to be a little bit faster right off the bat, but they slowed it down just a touch to, I guess, give you a little more control. But it does feel awkward when you have to slow down, when it's necessary to slow down, do your little jumps that are more precise, and then go back into a fast area. Because the pure feeling of Sonic the Hedgehog to me is doing all that fast stuff, tapping down on that D-pad when you need to. It's almost like there's a rhythm to it, So slowing down for those other more precise platforming aspects it's just a little awkward and sometimes doesn't feel out of place. It was one of the first things I wrote in my notes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And again, I think it probably helps the fact that because I played this originally at the time, and it was compared to a lot of contemporary games, particularly on the computers that I was used to, the controls still felt pretty slick. But actually, yes, there were definitely frustrations, particularly trying to just walk up a slope and just not even being able to get the speed together. So you have to literally run back a few feet on the level and then start running at things again. There were definitely some frustrations with it, but I think just years of kind of learning the layouts has kind of inured me to just remembering what the kind of the pace that you need to be at any particular point is.
Right.
And as I say, don't get me wrong, I am in no way like a proper good player, like a speedrunner type player, but I'm at the point now where I kind of know what's coming all the time. So I think that does help. But as I say, any version you play nowadays mostly will have the spin dash added.
Yeah. I think that's like a patch essentially. I would almost consider it canon to be in the first game. Like they meant it to be there. It's the spirit of the game. They just couldn't add it because it was right there in Sonic 2. Yeah. Yeah. And that alleviates a lot of that stuff, the momentum, getting up if you're in like a half pipe which happens kind of a lot, trying to go up a hill, having to go back and forth. One thing that I did was when going up a slope and not making it, I would press a button and you jump exactly perpendicularly off of whatever surface you're on. So you jump backwards as much as forwards in certain situations. It's a little weird.
Which you can use in quite a skillful technical way to get onto certain platforms, but also at other points it can be just quite irritating because you feel like you're not getting anywhere, and you're supposed to be this super cool, slick, fast-running hedgehog, and you're going everywhere, but you want where you want to go, which I guess is where some players' frustration emanates from.
Yeah. You had mentioned the looking up and looking down earlier, and another thing that surprised me was the degree of verticality in all these levels is immense.
Right.
Like more so than games that we think of as having added verticality. Like the first game we talked about on the show was Super Mario 2, and that added a lot of verticality. Then you have some other Super Nintendo games, even Super Mario World with the verticality. Not quite as much as Sonic, especially like later on when you're springing up off of those plungers, those like pinball plungers, and going, like 5 stories equivalent up on the screen. These levels are very wide and tall.
Of the screen. Yeah, it would. The way I would still play some of the early zones. So there's three Green Hill zones, and I would basically there's kind of 3 core paths across most of them. I think would be because you've got a 10-minute timer in this game. You've got time to go all the way to the end on each path and collect every single ring, and that would be my thing to do. Would be to collect every TV and every ring on all 3 paths, and by that point you'd have probably be leaving the level with several backup lives that you may or may not know.
Oh, that's very smart, because it's an odd number, so that allows you to go through to the end, backwards through the next one, and then forward to the end.
That's it. Not all the levels let you do that, but at least part of Green Hill Zone does.
Yeah, the one that they took 8 months to make.
That's right. Yeah. And there is, of course, there are some points bonuses because, this is a game of its time. There's also a scoring system, and you could play Sonic the Hedgehog for high score if you wanted to. There is a massive points bonus for finishing the level hyper quickly, which you obviously don't get if you do what I'm just talking about, but you don't care because you've got all the rings and all the lives, and but yes, for that's probably not something that would all players would enjoy doing, but for me it's kind of part of the ritual, is just the bimbling around the first levels and just hoovering up everything, trying to avoid taking a single hit the entire time.
I like that they have multiple ways to play it. You could do it the fast way. You could do it the more completionist way. And so I have never fully understood those point values that come up at the end of each level, where you see the Dr. Robotnik sign, you go past it, spins around, you jump. What is that all about? Does that have to do with your time?
I think the points that come out where I think it's just to do with what points on the screen you hit, but I'm not sure if it's consistent or not. So that might. I'm not entirely sure, actually.
It's not in the manual.
No,
it doesn't really say. And then sometimes there's a ring at the end of the level. What is that?
Yeah, so the giant ring takes you into the bonus stage. Yeah, so the bonus stage is something that they played around with. And virtually every Sonic has a different kind of bonus stage. Sonic 1's bonus stage, I both love and hate.
I love it.
In that, so you're put into ring form, and you're effectively kind of not really floating, but you're
bouncing.
And the space that you're in spins around you. It's got this kind of dreamlike music and this very odd surreal backdrop that morphs from different animals and things, but it is also rotates. Incredibly but it's also basically you can't really tell where you need to go, and there's lots of just instant fail states in the levels. There's lots of things and they're called confusingly they're called goal, making it look like it's where you want to go, but actually it's you're going to get ejected from the stage. It spins around and sends you back into the world, but actually what you're looking for, of course, are the legendary Chaos Emeralds, which are squirreled away somewhere in the stage.
Yeah.
And you need to somehow negotiate your way. There are little bumpers which you can use to change the direction of the rotation of the level, or speed it up or slow it down. And again, practice and experience will get you a long way in terms of knowing where to go. But the first few times, you will almost certainly just drop out the level, and you'll run out of opportunities to get Chaos Emeralds before the end of the game. And that's the only way to get the good, true ending. But really, the only difference it makes is a slightly different end credit sequence. But, there was nothing back in the day. There was no, New Game Plus or save state to say, yeah, you completed this game properly. It was just, you turned it off, but you knew you'd done it, and that was enough. So obviously, I think in modern versions, things like the Xbox 360 version, you'd get an achievement for collecting all the Chaos Emeralds and finishing the game properly. So there have been extrinsic rewards added for going the extra mile. But, of course, save states definitely are your friend in those special zones, right?
Yeah, for sure, which I didn't use.
If you can stand to use them.
Yeah. Normally I do. I don't know why. With Sonic, I just didn't want to. And another thing that's in those levels is kind of breakout style blocks where you hit them and they disappear, but you get bounced back. So you have to continually break these blocks to reach the Chaos Emerald. Usually it's somewhere in the center of an area with a lot of these surrounding, and you're bouncing off, and there are those goal areas kind of placed so that you're going to bounce into them if you aren't careful.
It's tense.
Yeah, it is. But I like it. It's a whole different game. It's really like a different game inserted into Sonic and doesn't really fit. I don't know.
Yeah, it's more like I don't know, Kururin on the Game Boy Advance or something like that. It's it's odd. And obviously, this in the second game they went for the kind of 3D tunnels, and then in the third game they went with the blue spheres 3D, and in the CD one they went with Mode 7 type 3. They never settled on this is what a Sonic bonus stage should be. They always they kept binning off the last one and adding a different one. I'm not sure they've ever nailed what they wanted to do with it, but this one is, if nothing else, it's kind of memorable and distinctive, and I really love the music.
Yeah, as we talked about, the music is all so good. We didn't talk a ton about the graphics, but the graphics for the time were phenomenal. So bright. They had a sort of 3D effect to them with they sort of did that checkerboard pattern where they could use the shapes to make it have a perspective effect. And it gave everything kind of a nice rounded look. So bright, so clear. Interesting enemy designs. Sonic himself is a great character design. This is a beautiful looking game, probably the best looking game that I played at that time, and it still looks great.
Oh, it was incredibly,
it ages immaculately,
incredibly striking. Multi layers of parallax gave it so much depth as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. The backgrounds,
the just that. Selling the idea of this, that you're in this this larger world. I actually like the fact that like there's barely any connection between levels. Like there's no real indication as to how you got from one place to another. But you can just kind of, I don't know.
So wildly different.
Use your imagination. Yeah, they are. Yeah, there's no. I mean, other than the sort of the motif of the checkerboarding, which actually doesn't even kind of last all the way through.
Right.
I guess in that sense, you can tell it's the kind of the first game in the series, because a lot of the ideas are kind of a bit more scattershot and a bit less coherent. But I think that actually is quite fun for it. It means that every level feels distinct in a way that not all games kind of manage. And yeah, I just, even as late teens, as a young man when I was playing this for the first time, but it still really sold me the feeling of kind of that childhood glee, that sense of exploration and wonder, the seeing the sparkling water and the distant scenery. I will fire this game up on my current generation console and TV, and I still think it looks really pretty. I think it looks really nice. And even though the pixels are pretty chunky by today's standards, yeah, it's a game visually, I don't think it stands up badly at all, really. I think a testament to that was when Sonic Mania came out a few years ago, which does enhance the pixel type graphics to quite a degree in terms of animation and complexity. But that was only, I can't remember what year that was, like 2017, 18, 19, something like that. I can't quite remember.
I don't really remember.
But it was essentially a 2D Sonic game for that generation of machine. And really it took all the graphical kind of themes and styles from the 30-year-old games and still looked pretty excellent as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. I think it was that whole idea of changing levels. I always like that in games, and I find that, for example, Super Mario 64 has always been a standout game for giving you a wildly diverse set of levels.
Yeah.
And that was fresh for Mario at that time, because even Super Mario World, which did have its different islands and zones, they still were mostly the same, maybe different color palettes. They still worked pretty similarly. And you got there slowly. Whereas Sonic jumped you in, like you said, to these brand new, sudden, different world. And I think that's great. And that kind of originated that a little bit in high profile platformers. That's something to be said. Another thing I wanted to mention much earlier was that I feel like the general design intention of Sonic and his speed and kind of winging through the level and just tapping down to kill your enemies and moving on quickly, I think Super Mario Galaxy tapped into the Sonic sort of level progression a little bit. You know how that kind of just slung you along? And Galaxy, to me, is one of the greatest Mario games ever made. And it kind of has that Sonic the Hedgehog swinging, slinging, spinning, flying through the whatever you do through the level, moving quickly through the level without, taking your time to stop and do a lot of things if you didn't want to. And that's really interesting to think about, that sort of influence, if it was an influence. It may not have been, but it definitely, I can see it like reverberating so many years later in Galaxy. Do you get that sense a little?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, bringing it back to you asking me my all-time favorite games, Super Mario Galaxy would be in that conversation in that echelon as well.
Nice choice.
But yeah, I do know what you're saying. That sort of sense of freewheeling, kind of surreal wonder that Sonic has, without kind of almost, there is an overarching theme, but without them kind of worrying too hard about always kind of hitting certain stylistic points or whatever. They're more concerned about creating a sense of wonder and adventure.
Yeah.
Which as I say, like for me, while I do enjoy a lot of the sort of the gameplay aspects of video games, so much of my enduring love for games is to do with achieving that sense of wonder that sparks the imagination and kind of sends you off to another place. And Sonic does do that, I think, in a way that Galaxy probably does as well.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end here, but Dr. Robotnik, or Dr. Eggman, he's at the end of each zone in a sort of different way as the boss. We have our 3 levels, and the 3rd level ends with a confrontation with Dr. Robotnik. What did you think about that? Are there any that stood out? What do you think?
I always appreciated that the boss fights in this were not too drawn out. They can be completed pretty quickly, especially if you know what's coming. I like the fact that there was a little bit of variety, so each time he would turn up with a slightly different tool set in this sort of Wile E. Coyote versus Roadrunner way. Like, what should I get him with this time? Okay, well, I'm going to hammer the tops of these statues so it fires blow darts at him. And of course, he always comes a cropper because something that he's doing also allows you to attack him, whether it's springboarding spiky little explosive balls up to him or jumping off the very blow darts that he's trying to hit you with and hitting the underside. I think the important aspects for me are the fact that actually hitting him sounds and feels good. Like there's a nice feedback to it. You know exactly, most of the time you know exactly where and when you can hit him safely to do damage, which I think is something that even some of the 2D sequels, which I like, as I say, I like the Mega Drive games all a lot. They got a bit more pernickety about when and where you could damage Eggman's egg. Yeah. Whereas in this one, it's pretty much like, it's clear now. It's clear that I can hit him. There was just enough peril because there were certain boss screens where you could drop off the bottom or whatever, as the platforms would get eaten away or set on fire or whatever. But yeah, none of them fills me with, I'm not a big boss fight fan in video games overall, with exceptions. There are definite exceptions, but there aren't any in this game, save maybe the very last one, which is pretty easy once you know how to do it, where he shows up and I'm like, oh god, not this. Generally you know that a few carefully timed leaps and he'll be out of there smoking and with his little panicked face. Yeah.
His face is so good.
Which adds a lot, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I like Dr. Robotnik as a boss. I kind of echo the way that you feel. He was very satisfying to hit because of that sort of dampening when you bounce off him. You don't like fully bounce off him, but you also kind of like penetrate his sprite ever so slightly, it feels like.
Yes.
And he has that flash and the sound. So it was always good. I do like how they mixed it up. Even one of them, you don't even attack him, or maybe you can, and I just wasn't able to. But it's
you can hit him, but
I hit him once the very beginning, and you're escaping from the water, and then he's gone.
Yeah, you can if you play that brilliantly, you can keep catching up to him and hit him a few more times, but he still ultimately just ends up flying off at the end of that stage. I suppose that is probably the stage that people are most likely to tap out on, the water stage, because of the kind of the pace of the game obviously slows to a crawl.
Yes.
And of course, what you won't have necessarily thought about is those of us who were playing this on PAL back in the day, our game was already
slow,
around 15% slower than yours.
I always
so
forget
the water
that.
levels were absolutely turgid. We coped, we made do, we didn't know to expect anything else. But yeah, it was a relief when we started getting the optimized versions later on. But yeah, I think if there was a level, if I was going to play up to a level and then stop because I'd had my fill, it would probably be Labyrinth.
Interesting. I actually really liked the Labyrinth zone, which is the water zone, because of how they just sneakily added in the oxygen system.
Oh god, we have to mention the terror.
Yeah, the sound, the music when you are running out of oxygen.
Oh, God.
How many times that thing runs out and Sonic just like looks stunned at the screen and falls off. Oh, I remember the heart, my heart stopping when I was a kid. Now it was fine, but in the original plays of this game, that was super panicky.
The only way it could have been worse would be if, I don't know if you remember the animation that Lara Croft used to do in the original Tomb Raider when she ran out of air, where she's kind of literally writhing and clutching for life.
Doesn't she clutch her neck, her throat?
Yeah. She's,
God.
If Sonic at least just kind of makes a kind of goofy, face. Horrific, though.
Yeah, but I think that was cool that they were able to incorporate that pretty seamlessly. Like there's just these bubbles coming up out of the floor. And what I do appreciate is kind of right when you approach them, they let out a big bubble that you can use to get air, and it refills you. Yeah, mostly. Except when you need it the most.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know if they've tweaked that frequency in some of the like the Sonic Origins version, but it feels like it's a bit more generous with the air bubbles.
Yeah.
I wonder if they had a little look at that. But yeah, more often than not.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So at the end of every episode, I like to ask my guest and myself whether revisiting the game in 2024 and beyond has been worth it or is worth it for someone else who's intending to do so. So, what are your final thoughts on Sonic the Hedgehog, and would you rate it a smash? Or if it's not a smash, I guess we'll call it more of a brick. So what do you think?
I think we've been sort of quite careful to acknowledge a lot of the irritations that are commonly leveled at Sonic, and particularly Sonic 1, which obviously was a, kind of test space for this set of mechanics. Even 1 year later, when they released the much vaunted sequel, as I say, although it was some of the same team and some different folks, they'd refined some elements, possibly at the expense of some others, but I guess that's for another show. Actually, it wasn't the first kind of big, colourful character action platformer that they'd released on the Mega Drive. I'm a massive fan of Castle of Illusion, starring Mickey Mouse, which was prior to this. Much slower game, but actually you can feel some of the kind of the relationship. Beautiful art, beautiful sound, beautiful everything. I love that game. Also kind of very finishable and designed to be completed, and perhaps in some ways less frustrating than Sonic. But I still fundamentally find the moment-to-moment gameplay of Sonic enjoyable. And as I say, I do wonder, going back to John Linneman's point, is maybe some of the folks who don't are forgetting to tap down on the D-pad to turn into a spiky ball of destruction.
Yeah.
So for me, like I've probably completed this game as many times as any other game that's ever been made, or at least started it. Many, many hundreds of times. As I say, I'll always pick it up whenever it's re-released on whatever platform and have another go. I might be more likely to actually play through one of the sequels. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is kind of epic in its entirety. But Sonic 1, absolutely, still a smash for me.
Okay.
And still a pleasure to play.
So a smash from Leon, and a smash from me. I'm not gonna tiptoe around it. I think Sonic the Hedgehog, even though I was not a Sega kid at all, I did play it. It was my first 16-bit game, and it still plays well. There is that, the weird control there with the down button, but actually, it would be really wise, I think, if when games from a long time ago are re-released on modern consoles, to just kind of put the instruction booklet on screen for you to tap the A button through the pages, or like press start to skip this, because that was a part of the game back then. And if you just look at the instruction manual, it says it right there. Press the D button down when Sonic's moving to bump off enemies with the super sonic spin attack. And if you know that right off the bat, which you would, it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah.
It's just coming to it later. We don't have instruction manuals even included with games anymore. You learn in the game. But yeah, I mean, this game is, it's historic. It's an inductee into the Video Game Hall of Fame. It cemented Sega as a contender. It's just a good game. The level design is interesting and deeper than you expect. It's got a variety of ways to play. It's got a variety of obstacles that are interesting to navigate. It's just a good game. Definitely a smash. I recommend playing it. It was worth it. I was happy to play it. So yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog's a smash, and it is worth revisiting and was worth revisiting in 2024 and beyond. And now that you've heard what we think, I'm going to quickly pull in a couple of back-of-the-box style quotes from members of our Discord. I have one here from Sogeki Dan, says, "Cold take. I never liked Sonic games for their gameplay." Maybe he liked it for the graphics and sound. Or maybe he didn't like it at all. And Carlos says, the speed versus platforming again strikes me as such an odd mix and never really meshes well, but I enjoyed it. Also, the teeter-totters mechanic is awesome. So that's a couple from our Discord. And I also want to take a minute to give a special shout out to some of our younger listeners. You know, we give the perspective as old gamers from the 70s, 80s, 90s. But we do have some younger listeners, and I just want to say, hey, thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you're learning about these old games. It's awesome. I really appreciate it, and I'm really happy to see and hear about younger gamers getting into this old stuff. That's really cool. Thanks, everybody, for listening and playing along with us if you did, and thanks, Leon, for joining me on the show today. Thanks, Leon.
Thanks for asking me. Always fun to talk about Sonic.
Now, Leon, you can find at the Cane and Rinse podcast, which you can search on any podcasting platform. Wherever you're listening now, go find Cane and Rinse and listen to 600 some odd episodes, right?
Yeah, go for it.
So find Leon there and take a look at wherever you are listening, or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. And if you've made it this far, leave us a generous and helpful 5-star rating and review for totally free. But if you want to go above and beyond that and support the show monetarily while getting some fun perks, head over to patreon.com/smashingbricks and become a patron for as little as $1 a month. You could also jump into the awesome Fire Flower tier and choose a specific game to be played on an upcoming Power Up episode. You can read my personal notes for every game, you can get ongoing recognition on the show, or you can even join me as a guest at a higher tier of support. That's patreon.com/smashingbricks. We have a Discord where you can come chat about pretty much anything, leave commentary about upcoming or past games, or suggest games to be considered for the show. Check out the Smashing Bricks playlist to see what you think needs to be added, or to call out a game you think we should play ASAP. Links to everything mentioned, plus Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch can be found in the episode description and at our link tree, which is linktr.ee/smashingbricks. As for next episode, it is a Power Up episode. This is a game chosen by one of the show's Fire Flower patrons, and it will be the 9th entry in one of the most beloved JRPG franchises in the history of video games. Next episode, patron Legit Camel has presented us with Final Fantasy IX on the Sony PlayStation. I will be joined by a mystery guest, yet to be announced, and discuss this 4-disc beast of a game. So get your hands on a copy, play along, send in your thoughts, and join us next time on Smashing Bricks. That about wraps it up for today. I'm still Eddie Inzauto. That is Leon Cox. And until next time, may the nostalgia be with you.